The views expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect those of this station.
Welcome to Insights into Northeast Michigan, a WBKB News public affairs program. Insights deals with the issues affecting those in the community as well as Northeast Michigan and the state. And now, Insights into Northeast Michigan.
Welcome to another Insights. I'm Lauren Mixon, and today I am here with Andrea Mills of the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, and she's going to be talking to us about invasive species in the Great Lakes. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Andrea.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Of course. So invasive species are a problem a lot of people may not know about. If you're not out on the water, if you're not a fisherman, a lot of people may not think about species in the Great Lakes or invasive species or just what's in the water in general. But this is a really big thing and a big problem that we're having in the Great Lakes right now. If you could talk to me a little bit about that.
Sure, you're absolutely right, Lauren. Invasive species are one of the world's greatest threats to biodiversity. And in the Great Lakes, we have over 180 non-native species that are living in the Great Lakes. Now, a non-native species is slightly different from an invasive species. An invasive species would actually be worse. So an invasive species is a species that has established in a new ecosystem. In this case, we're talking about the Great Lakes. And that's enough to label it non-native. But to actually be called an invasive species, that species has to cause some kind of harm. And that harm could either be economic harm, and it can also be, and typically is, environmental harm. So having negative effects on the food web. And so in the Great Lakes, we have a variety of invasive species, and I've brought a few examples today if you'd like to see them.
Yeah, so if you could tell us a little bit about what invasive species are really common in the Great Lakes that we're seeing right now.
Sure. One of the ones that is most common that many people have heard of would be the zebra and quagga mussels. The zebra and quagga mussels are organisms that came to the Great Lakes from the Ponto-Caspian region of Eastern Europe and Russia. What these guys do, they're fairly small, but they've had big effects on the Great Lakes. These mussels have come in, they establish across the bottom of the Great Lakes, and then they filter feed. And they have done a marvelous job of basically filtering out the majority of the nutrients and the microorganisms that are living in the Great Lakes. So the water in the Great Lakes has become considerably more clear because of the invasion of the zebra and the quagga mussels, but unfortunately that's actually a very bad thing. Clear water means water that has very few nutrients and organisms in it to feed the food web. And so by invading, these mussel species have actually wiped out the base of the food web, and because it's the foundation of the food web, that can literally affect almost every other single organism that exists in the Great Lakes. So these invasive mussels have had very big effects on the Great Lakes. And many people would probably know these because their dead shells will wash up on the shores, and it's pretty easy to cut your feet on them if you're not careful when you're walking. Yeah, so these have caused many problems. Another invasive species, while we're talking about small invaders, another one would be the spiny water fleas. Some people also call them by their scientific name, which is Bythotrephes. Quite small. They're less than ½ an inch long, but they've also had big effects. These sit at the middle of the food web. These little critters are a type of invertebrate. They're a type of zooplankton. Then they eat other zooplankton. Now what zooplankton are is they are the aquatic invertebrates that many young fish, the larval fish, rely on early on in their life. Most young fish eat zooplankton for at least a few months after they're born, and that is how these spiny water fleas are causing harm. The spiny water fleas compete with young fish over zooplankton as prey, and unfortunately these spiny water fleas are far more numerous than the young fish are, and so these spiny water fleas outcompete young fish in the Great Lakes. And unfortunately, if you look closely, this tiny little body has a really long spine for its size.
It does.
More than half of the body length of a spiny water flea is devoted to a long spine, and that's protection. This long spine keeps young fish from being able to eat the spiny water fleas. So not only do these spiny water fleas compete with young fish, they also do not serve as a useful food resource. So again, these little creatures are having some pretty big effects in the Great Lakes.
So let's go back to the zebra and quagga mussels really quickly, because I've heard a little bit about those and some of the harmful effects that they have even on boaters. Could you talk to me about that really quickly?
Yes, so these zebra and quagga mussels can grow on a variety of surfaces. One of them would be the hulls of boats, and they also grow on pilings, docks that are in the water. Unfortunately, they can also grow on the screens that cover the intakes for many municipal water supplies, so they can be very challenging because they can clog water supplies. And like we said, they grow on boats. They can also infest or grow on the motors of boats. And that's an important bit of information, because one of the ways that zebra and quagga mussels can be spread from one system, one lake, to another is when a boat has some zebra or quagga mussels that are growing on it or have attached to the boat motor, and then that boat moves to a new ecosystem, to a new lake. Those zebra and quagga mussels could drop off and start a new population in the new system. And so one of the best things that people can do to prevent the spread of zebra and quagga mussels, as well as many other invasive species, is to wash off the outside, the hulls of boats, as well as the motors, and empty live wells as well on boats, because these little creatures can get inside the live wells. There's a young stage called a veliger. That's what the larval, essentially, zebra and quagga mussel is called. That stage is planktonic, meaning it floats in the water, and it could very easily get inside a live well, and it could also establish a population elsewhere. So clean all of those parts of the boat out that I mentioned, make sure they're free of zebra and quagga mussels, and then it's safe to move on to a new system, new lake.
That is a lot that a lot of people may not have known about. Now I see one more thing down here, and that looks like the big head carp. Could you talk to me a little bit about that one?
Sure, and I'll bring over my example. So this is just a little big head carp. So big head carp are one species of 4 species of Asian carp that are threatening invasion into the Great Lakes. The 4 species would be big head carp, silver carp, grass carp, and black carp. Big head is one of the better known species. The other one that's very well known would be the silver carp. And they're well known because if they end up in the Great Lakes, and I certainly hope they do not, and many people are working very hard to keep these carp species out of the Great Lakes, but if they were to end up in the Great Lakes, they could cause enormous harm. This big head carp right here is only a few months old. This is a young big head carp. It could reach over 90 pounds, maybe even over 100 pounds when it is full grown. What this fish does is it feeds on the plankton in the water column, so the microscopic animals and plants such as the zooplankton we mentioned earlier, as well as algae that lives in the water. And again, those form the base of the food web, and so by filtering out the zooplankton and the phytoplankton, they can have negative effects on other fish, other organisms that are living in those systems.
Wow, well that is definitely a lot to learn about. I had no idea there were this many invasive species, and this is just a few of them.
Correct.
So thank you, Andrea, for telling us about these invasive species. That was very interesting, and we'll have more insights when we come back.